Welcome to the final Insights from Women Leaders event of 2020. My name is Rola Kaakeh, and I'm the CEO of Salus Vitae Group, and I'll be the host for the event. Now, for those joining us again, welcome back. We have had, I think over the course since October, 9 speakers thus far. So this is the 10th one. So if you have joined us in any previous other sessions, welcome back. And for those that are new to the series, welcome. We're very, very happy that you're joining us in this conversation. Now, we are hoping to continue the series in 2021, but right now, before we go off for the holidays, we have a wonderful conversation planned for you. Now, a little background on the Insights from Women Leaders series. Like I mentioned, we launched in October to highlight the journeys and contributions of various women leaders in healthcare. These industry leaders will share their insights on a range of topics impacting healthcare, our communities, and their role in shaping the future. As I mentioned before, we've already had 9 guest leaders, and so if you would like to watch any of the replays or the recordings for those sessions, those all are available on our website, salusvitaegroup.com. Now, over the course of an hour today, we're going to ask our guest leader a number of questions. I will start first, and then we actually open it up to audience questions. So there is a Q&A box where you can submit your questions at any point during the conversation. We will get to them towards the end, so don't be worried if we're not addressing them quite yet. But we do encourage you to ask any questions that you may have. There is also a chat option that should go to us, but I do recommend the Q&A. It's just much easier to look at. We also encourage you both during and after the event to post any takeaways from the event in the Q&A box and on various social media platforms, and you're welcome to tag us at Salus Vitae Group. We always love to hear how you benefited from the various insights of our guest leaders, as well as hoping to spread those insights to as many people as possible. Now, the session today will be recorded and available for replay after the event. Now, I'm very, very happy to introduce and welcome our guest leader today, Dr. Tina Moen. Dr. Tina, we talked about this earlier, where Dr. Moen has spent the last 18 years in healthcare information technology industry, providing clinical leadership to colleagues and clients in the United States and abroad. Tina serves as the Senior Deputy Chief Health Officer and Chief Pharmacy Officer within IBM. In this role, Tina leads a team working across the business to provide clinical leadership and support for strategy and sales. She also leads a strategic relations team responsible for engaging healthcare and business leaders in IBM-led advisory councils, networks, and panels within the goal of fostering robust discussion and ideation for technology's role and opportunity to advance health and healthcare across the globe. Prior to IBM, she was the VP of Client Strategy for Health Language, part of Wolters Kluwer Health. Previously, Tina also worked at Truven Health Analytics in a variety of roles. She served as the VP of Provider Analytics, leading a team of data scientists and researchers responsible for creating and maintaining data and methodologies. Now, prior to moving into the health information technology industry, she worked as a clinical pharmacist in the specialty areas of pediatrics, home healthcare, HIV, and organ transplantation. Welcome, and thank you again for taking the time to be with us today.
Thank you, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Of course. Okay, so we have asked across the board thus far, all of the guest leaders somewhat similar questions, but each has provided a very unique perspective on with regards to the responses. But one question that we always have started out with, especially as we've moved from the bios and what they're currently doing, what they're previously doing to what they're currently doing. The next question, or the first question we generally have is, did you expect to be where you are today?
No, no. When I was in pharmacy school, actually, I talk about this quite a bit. When I was in pharmacy school, the career options that we talked about, in fact, the classes we chose from were hospital-focused pharmacy practice or community-based pharmacy practice. There was a little bit of murmuring occasionally that you could maybe also go over to pharma and do something as a medical science liaison or something like that. But I thought for sure that I would be a clinical pharmacist in a hospital my entire career, which is where I started in pediatrics, but had no idea that a role like the one I have and have had for the last many years was even a thing that was an option. So I had no idea.
I like we've had a nice mix of with our guest leaders in terms of who expected to be and who hasn't. So it's always been interesting to kind of hear that, because for many people, you would think of leaders that seemed very intentional throughout their whole career, knew exactly where they wanted to be, but there is truly that mix of the unknown and being very intentional about it.
Yeah.
Now, yeah, please.
Oh, sorry. Just it's interesting. One of the things I often talk about is that I often don't know what my next thing is going to be, and have had people who have reported to me that have that same dynamic, and I've had that conversation with people I report to many times. That opportunistic, what's the next thing that seems to have appeared in front of me. And my dad used to always tell me not to say no to opportunities very often, because then they stop coming. And so some of those opportunities were things I never would have dreamed of. Some of them weren't things I necessarily wanted, but I knew that I would learn something from them. And so dove in head first and definitely learned things that were important and sometimes hard and a little bit painful, but that opportunistic seeing what life presents what life presents has definitely been how I would categorize my career.
So that's a wonderful transition to the next group of questions in terms of looking to the future. And now you had mentioned that you're not sure what's going to be the next step. But when you look back, like when you're looking forward and thinking about your future or your legacy, what's in your future? What do you want your legacy to be?
Great question. I think, well, if we start with the legacy part of the question, I really think about legacy more as on the personal side of life versus a body of work per se, although certainly the two go hand in hand. But I start with who do I want people to remember me as? And this is something I think comes with life and age and some maturity and evolution that we all go through as we get a little older. But things like, did I show up in the right ways and share whatever gifts I may have been given? Have I been the best version of a human and a daughter and a sister and a mother and all of those things? And then on the work side, that those two things are so intertwined, right? If I'm working hard to leave a legacy in my personal life that represents the kind of person I want to be, that shows up at work too. So as the kind of colleague and teammate and clinician and leader that helped make a difference, and both in the lives of the people who know me personally and work with me, but also in the lives of the people that we care for in healthcare, whether that be in health tech or in direct patient care. So making a difference in the health of people and showing up and being the person that I want to be is sort of how I see my future and the legacy I'd like to leave.
I really liked how you started off with determining legacy. Is it in personal or professional? I think oftentimes we either separate and then you made the connection that oftentimes they're not separate entities. They bleed into each other in a positive way. And I think even starting to think like that, like, are you separating a legacy that is just professional versus personal, and can you mix them? I really like that approach that you took, because some of our other guest leaders do have that more grand, and like you mentioned, the perspective of making a difference, but then also some of them have very concrete, like, this is what I want to do as a professional. And I think a mix of those two is really nice. And I love how you highlighted that. And so, but as you look to your past and present experiences, what has really have those shaped your future outlooks? I mean, have those basically told you this is important, this is not important? How has this outlook or legacy definition or approach that you've taken, how has that been shaped by your experiences?
Great question. I think, as I mentioned, I've definitely mellowed with age, which is good for people who maybe knew me when I was a little bit younger. So I think our experiences in life shape who we become, as we probably all can acknowledge. I've had the opportunity to have a variety of so many different roles, both in traditional pharmacy practice in my early career, as well as lots of different roles in health tech. So when I look back, I realized that those roles, including some of the ones I mentioned that presented themselves and maybe weren't on the top of my list of, man, I really want to do that thing, or that looks hard. But I took on those challenges and showed up for other people and showed up for my team and my company and the patients that were, and the clinicians that were supporting in the tools that we provide. And so I realized that showing up in all of those different kinds of roles with all the good things that came of them, and as well as all the challenges has definitely shaped me. It's taught me some hard lessons, taught me some important lessons, taught me a lot of things about who I do want to be and who I don't want to be. So I think if we're intentional about looking back at those things, then there's lots of lessons to be learned along the way, both on the positive and the redirecting side, if you will, that motivate you to move towards the direction that you, again, want to leave that legacy and who you want to be.
Yeah, and I like even thinking and talking to you about kind of your experiences prior, as well as that showing up took different forms, right? It took different forms in terms of you showed up in a different position, but potentially even working with diverse people, like you had mentioned, given your roles, you've worked with different people. And so I think even breaking that down further, right? Showing up by using your voice or your skills in these different settings is so powerful. And I think your background is very reflective of those types of things. Now here we tend to be pretty optimistic. I feel like most speakers are very excited about the future. But when you think about the future, what excites you about it?
I'm pretty optimistic about the future too. I'm a pretty optimistic person. And now while we're all feeling we're all in a challenging time, a challenging year, I think there's some silver linings even within the year, particularly in the healthcare space. But when I think about the future as related to my career, I get really excited about the continued potential for technology to continue to really make a difference in how we enable people to take care of patients, how we enable patients to take care of themselves. So obviously technology, really important that it's responsibly deployed, but in organizations, certainly like IBM and others that have a focus on this responsible deployment of technology, the responsible use of data, things like that, the opportunity that we have is enormous to continue to improve how health systems and countries and clinicians take care of humans in their charge. So, how do we surface insights that live in that wealth of data that is being captured in really every aspect of our life, certainly in healthcare as well. So how do we capture all the insights that are in there effectively? How do we bring that together so that we can help bring people together for shared experiences and bring them together for their shared expertise, again, to make a positive difference in healthcare around the world. I think that it's really important that we continue to make sure, and we as clinicians, I say this on the clinical side now as opposed to the health tech side necessarily, but making sure that we don't allow technology to become a wedge between that human to human interaction, which is so key in healthcare. Healthcare is a human to human industry at the end of the day, and many of us went into healthcare because we have a caregiver nature in our personality, and so making sure that technology is always an adjunct to that human to human interaction, I think is really exciting, and helping folks take better care again of themselves or their patients with technology as an adjunct, and letting the humans focus on other humans. I think that's really exciting.
Yeah. I feel like anytime I talk to any colleagues in the technology space, because I feel technology, they're very futuristic thinkers anyway, and they kind of see, like you said, the amount of data and the potential to be able to have that. But you did bring up a very important point in terms of the human element to that, and recognizing that it is just going to augment and help and assist, and that's very exciting. But so when you see excitement in that, then you kind of begin to step up and think, well, where's my role with the technology? If technology wants to advance and can advance so quickly, and you are positive about the future, I feel like, that's like you're just going to connect and hold hands like with technology, and let's go, let's do this, right?
Yeah, even if we our tool and our friends, not because certainly it has the potential to have a negative impact too. I think we've seen that in the overuse of technology in people's lives and things like that. So we just have to be very mindful of that, and hold ourselves in the healthcare industry to a standard that doesn't allow the technology to overtake the fact that oftentimes, not always, sometimes you're in the healthcare situation and all is well, and you're, it's happy times. You might be having a baby or just a well check, or you're perfectly healthy or what have you. But oftentimes it's scary, and people are unsure about what's going on, and they're fearful, and so those are the reasons we have to make sure that the human-to-human connection stays front and center, because that's what, at the end of the day, that's what life is about, right? It's the connections and the relationships we make. So we can't let technology get in the way of that in healthcare.
Yeah, to really truly understand the limitations in each side, and where our continued role is as healthcare providers, or anyone within the space of improving health would need to understand. I think that there's definitely so much power in that. So then when you think about the future, what tools or skills do you think that we need to build in order to design this future that we hope for, or to address the challenges that we currently have?
Well, first of all, we all have to continue, particularly my generation and above. I think when I think about my kids who are in their 20s, they have a shorter gap to bridge on being really familiar with technology and understanding it. But when you get us into some of us older folks who aren't digitally native and didn't grow up with technology at our fingertips, we have to make sure that we are learning about it, educating ourselves, so that we can go back to that idea of responsibility, that responsibility aspect of deepening the role of technology in health while not letting it impact the human connection. So clinicians of all shapes and sizes, all ilks, the pharmacists, nurses, physicians, et cetera, we all need to be engaged in the dialogue around the development and continuing evolution of the next generation technologies. So I say this in pharmacy circles all the time: we got to make sure our voice is heard, so that tools that are being created and assets that are being created are supporting our work, are supporting our insights, are supporting us with our patients, and serving as that adjunct to that patient clinician relationship, so that we remain human centered. So I think the biggest tool, and we're seeing this, which is great. We're seeing it certainly in schools of pharmacy and nursing and medicine, but we're seeing it in conferences and educational programs to help those of us that maybe have been in clinical careers for a while, help us get more fluent with technology, so that we can have a voice when an organization comes and say, hey, we're thinking about adding some AI technology to our hospital. The clinicians who will be impacted by that, and the care that they'll be giving to patients that will be impacted by that, need to be able to engage in the discussion and understand the technology enough. We don't have to be technologists, just like the technologists don't have to be clinicians. It's that partnership between those two things. We need to be able to hold our side of the conversation so that they can hold theirs, and something valuable and not disruptive to the relationship piece is created. Yeah,
I think during the pandemic too, now 2020 has really shown us, technology has taken center stage, and it is a huge element of our life. Right now, we're using technology, obviously, to have this event. And so now the conversation isn't if technology is going to be an integral part of our lives anymore. It will be, and it's growing. And it's not if we have a place in health as healthcare providers, it's where do we have a place. And I think that's definitely a general theme that I'm noticing with what you're saying, is that, we have to identify where we fit into not that if we fit, where we fit in, and we can best utilize and position ourselves for that. Because like you said, they're designing systems. What better way that if you are designing pharmacy systems, that there are pharmacists there, or those that are part of that team. And so, yeah, I agree 100%.
Yeah, that's why roles like mine exist, and roles like the team that I'm on exist, is to have people, we have, certainly IBM has the technology expertise and has for 100 years, and has actually been in healthcare for many, many years as well. But having also people on the other side of the coin for any industry. So I'm in the healthcare group and have a healthcare background, But the finance industry needs people that have the finance industry expertise as well. So that's why roles like ours exist, and why I'm excited. And I think we talked about it a little bit. You talked about it a little bit with Dr. Moen when you had her on, around the education needs to make sure that folks that are coming out of pharmacy school, that there's a handful of them that want to move into roles like mine or roles like the team that I'm on, so that we have our voice heard. And same for medicine and nursing and all of those things. So it's that's the fact that roles like mine have evolved into existence, I think, is a really good thing, and demonstrates the technology organization's understanding of needing that perspective as they're building things for different constituents.
Yeah, definitely perspective and co-designing for sure. And I think, and we know, like, when you've implemented any initiative in general, when you co-design with those that are going to potentially use it, or those that they know that's going to impact their patients, it's much more effective. It's much more sustainable.
Right.
So,
yeah. You get that, and you get that, that ownership and that buy-in right away. Right.
Yeah. So we want to transition into kind of the world of looking at success and what success means to you and creating those environments. So if we just take, the first simple question is, how do you define success?
Interesting question. I think it's a kind of a tricky question. I've been asked this a couple of times by new early professional hires and early professionals, things like that. I think it's a tricky question, because in my head, when I hear how do you define success, it sort of implies that success is an endpoint. And I really view it as more of a continuum. So I like was Thomas Edison's philosophy of success. What he's quoted as, he didn't fail 1,000 times or 100 times or however many times to make a light bulb. He successfully found 100 or 1,000 ways not to make one. And so that's how I think about certainly my success and the success of the people around me. So I think we learned so much from things that didn't go well, didn't go as planned, may not have been seen as successful in the world's definition. So I define success sort of in the million little ways throughout the day, throughout the year, where I've learned something. I've successfully learned something. Just like Thomas Edison, he learned 1,000 ways not to make a light bulb. I've learned many ways to not do things as well, which have then taught me to not do that again, or to do it differently. Not always the first time. Sometimes I have to learn it more than once, but and then that's sort of what's helped me move along. So whether it's learning how to reach a specific desired endpoint, or completing an objective, achieving some sort of a result, I think the success comes in my mind with learning a solid lesson about whatever the thing might be. A way not to do it is equally as important as the way that it was successful, that did work, that I did reach that endpoint. So sort of have this fuzzy definition of success as the million little ways, million little things I've learned along the way. If that makes sense.
No, for sure. I like tying it in with the learning part, because we often hear those that aren't learning from the mistakes are missing an opportunity, right? And so I think how you've addressed it in terms of successes in the learning. So even if you are not succeeding and you have failed, there's an element, that little piece, like you said, that you take towards your success. And so that's really nice. Now, when you think about, though, creating your environment for success or for learning, how do you begin to create that environment? Obviously, you do want some wins, even with some fails. So is there a specific technique that you use, the thought process that you think about to create an environment?
There is, I think, and it isn't one that I set out to create per se, but it just is by nature of who I am as a person. So I'm a pretty introspective person. And so I spend maybe more than my fair share of time thinking back about, what something I just did, or a conversation I just had, or a project I just worked on, or an interaction I had with someone, and try to find those learning moments, those million little successes. So I think the environment, I've given myself permission, one, to be introspective, but also I hold myself accountable to do that on a regular basis, to ask myself, what did I learn from that? How did that go? And I think I found that setting that expectation for myself, to where I remind myself to question and learn from the little things along the way is really what has built the environment for me to mindfully move ahead in whatever direction, whether that be in a relationship or a project or a skill set. So it kind of takes away that feeling of needing to do everything right, which is unfortunately a dynamic we have in the human nature of not liking to screw things up, not liking to do things wrong. So allowing myself to be introspective and know that even if this isn't going well, that I'll learn from it, and then that's the success in it. So it takes away that feeling of needing to do everything right. I expect to learn something. I expect to be able to find some aspect that I might try differently, or some aspect that I might repeat because, man, that worked great. So I think this environment of holding myself accountable to introspection is what has allowed me to move ahead in my career and other areas of my life.
And so we do have we have a diverse audience in the sense that there are some that are students still all the way to executives and hold leadership positions. And so for you, as you've grown, you've done that consistently kind of across since did you find that you were like that more when you were a student and kind of progressed? Or was that something later that you did more as you moved up the ladder per se, or took on more leadership positions?
Great question. It is not something I've done my whole life. I wish I had that sort of frame of mind as a younger person. So I would say it really started. So I started in people management. I don't know, in my I guess early 30s, I would say, and I don't think I got it right in the beginning. And there's probably some people who have reported to me that would agree. And so and it was a struggle. It was a struggle probably for them, and it was a struggle for me. And that's when I started. So I wasn't young, but I wasn't deep into my career either. But I started really thinking about, I felt the tension, and I felt the tension in my own heart. I felt the tension in interactions with the people I was managing. And there was just kind of a light that almost switched about wanting to put more focus on thinking about how I did something, how I interacted, how that went, how that might have been perceived by the other side. So kind of started in my early 30s, I would think, because of my early experiences in people management and not enjoying the bumpiness that I was experiencing because I was trying to do everything right. I thought everything I had to do had to be right, and I thought I had to have all the answers. And of course, none of us do everything right or have all the answers. So it wasn't a quality I was born with, for sure.
But there's definitely something very powerful about that, because it's never too early, but it's also never too late to do that, right? So you still found success, even though the fact that you weren't doing it, your whole career, in doing, like, realizing at one point. So even anybody that hasn't felt like, I don't normally do that, but maybe it's something I should start doing, just try it. Like, I think there's a lot of value, no matter where you are in your career, in having that element of it. So I just wanted to kind of get your perspective on that, because I think it's important that the audience kind of hears that sometimes people see someone and they're like, oh, they've had it figured out, their whole career. And it is something that, and it might be this for you, might be something else for someone else. So that reflection is truly very important.
Yeah, I completely agree.
Yeah, so you work on many different initiatives, given your position or what you are passionate about throughout the years. How do you begin to prioritize where you put your energy, what you focus on?
Can we crowdsource the right answer to that? I'm not sure I'm nailing that one, but so I, like most people, I have way more things on my to-do list than I actually have time to do, my approach to prioritization of my own workload, whether that be my variety of different roles, my role as the chief pharmacy officer, my role as a manager, as a leader, as a colleague, I try to use what are those four? I can't remember what the name of the framework is, but the four quadrants of, this is important and urgent. Is this urgent but not important? Is it not urgent, but it is important, or is it not urgent and not important? I try to use that. It doesn't always work, partly because often our stakeholders, they think it's more important than maybe we do, or more urgent than maybe we do, or more often, I have all these different stakeholders, as all of us do, and and stakeholder A thinks their thing is more important than stakeholder B's thing, but the flip side is true as well. The other person thinks theirs is more important. So it's always a challenge. I think it ultimately comes down to transparent communication, where we have dialogue with those stakeholders to really understand the importance and the urgency, where this fits in the scheme of things we might be trying to do as a business, and talk across stakeholders so that they understand why I might be deprioritizing their thing over this other thing, and have that transparent communication, so that everybody understands. And then of course you have to sprinkle in some time management tricks, where sometimes something might not be that important, but it's quick, and so you can get it off your to-do list quickly. It kind of reminds me of what we all learned about triaging patients, right? So we don't necessarily jump right on the thing that the patient first comes in and complains about. There's a communication and a dialogue, so that you understand that I'm not going to worry about the sliver they might have in their finger if if they're deep in the midst of kidney failure or something.
Yeah.
So
analogy.
It's really understanding the whole of what's going on, and then putting them into some of these buckets of this is important and urgent, and the sliver in the finger is going to have to wait. But you need to have that conversation with the patient too, because maybe they don't feel the kidney failure as much as they feel the sliver.
Yeah.
So that's how it is. Again, it's not, I don't think there's a perfect science though. So certainly I, like many others, struggle with that and sometimes get it wrong. But that communication piece, I think is what it's all about, to make sure that people around you understand why you've prioritized something where you have.
Yeah, communication and the transparency of it is definitely something that I took from that, for sure. Now, although we've been very optimistic and the future looks wonderful, there are challenges and obstacles that we do face. Are there any that keep you up at night that you're thinking about?
Yeah, sure. Although I'm a very good sleeper in general, but
we want you to continue to sleep, hopefully that doesn't be like, maybe I should be staying up at night. No, continue sleeping, but
I'm very good at it. So certainly I, like many others, are appropriately worried and concerned about all the things going on in the world and in our country and all of those things. But if we focus, so beyond those things, if we focus on the work side of things, I think one of the things that is being discussed, but is also worrisome, is, in this technology business and in a data and AI and analytics business, that there's the challenge around the insufficient diversity in data worries many of us. So the data is used to feed AI, and recommendations that come out of AI is dependent on the data that goes in. And so this lack of diversity in data, which isn't new in healthcare, it's been around for a long time, and many of us have talked about it in evidence-based medicine materials and real world data sets, that they don't always reflect the whole of the population. And so that's not a new problem, but it is got an even brighter light shine on it, partly now because AI is and its impact in healthcare is growing, but also because of all of the much needed discussion that's happening in the world today around diversity and equity in general. So that's a challenge that has to be addressed and is being addressed, but it's not going to go away overnight either. I think that if we think about technology really having that opportunity to democratize healthcare insights, so that people in many places have access to insights to help solve tough healthcare problems, that's a fantastic use of technology. But if the data doesn't adequately represent, my group or your group or our patient population, then do we have equity? So those are some of the things that we sort of chew on at IBM and think about how do we move the needle on that diversity of data so that recommendations are being made for people in the groups that they sit in and have adequate data to support those recommendations.
Yeah, that's a wonderful point, because oftentimes we want to make sure that we don't design our technology to reflect the real world, because it's flawed. There's gaps, there's biases. We don't want to just take the biases that we might have already in healthcare and throw them into the technology. And to your point, it's what we're feeding the system. What's the data that it's getting? Because it's only as powerful and effective as the data that it gets, right? Like you have to feed it something. And so I'm so happy you brought up that point, because oftentimes we're not trying to mimic real world. We're trying to design for a better one, utilizing, we're designing for better outcomes so that we ensure that those that maybe aren't representative in these data sets, how do we work to make sure they are represented effectively? Because I've been reading a lot of articles in terms of, the biases that we bring towards if we do design those systems, the way that they are done now, there are so many biases that even AI has picked up on and is like naturally doing. And, even the data in terms of like who is very talkative, for example, like electronic health, who's very talkative in their doctor's appointments versus who's not. So you have very different data for somebody who is very talkative and trusts their healthcare provider and is able to provide that, for somebody that maybe isn't, there isn't many notes on them. So I think that is a very interesting conversation. I'm very glad to hear that it is something that you guys are intentionally looking at, because it's very, very important.
Important for sure, yeah.
So we're going to transition a little bit now into the topic of leadership and mentorship. I always say that these are simple questions, but there's like so much depth in them. And another colleague, she was like, yeah, you keep saying they're simple, like success and leader, like as if it's something that we're supposed to define in 2 words. But it's simple in the sense that the question isn't very long, but the depth of it and how you perceive it is. So we do ask a question across the board for our leaders in terms of how would you describe a leader? And we tend to do that first. Give us a very simple 1 to 2 sentence description of how you describe a leader, and then maybe elaborate a little bit more on why you use that simpler definition of it, and really what shaped that outlook for you.
Yeah. So I think when you asked me this originally, I think I said something along the lines of a good leader being someone who blends together vision and teamwork, but also with some humility, with the goal of inspiring others and the team to do their best work. So that's my high level way I think about who leaders are. Why I think that's the not simple part, right? So I think about this, I guess from the perspective of, again, being introspective, as I mentioned, the type of leader that I want to be and the type of leader that I want to follow. So that blend of humility, being able to acknowledge and learn from things we've done, both the good and the bad, have the vision, having some sight into where the team needs to go, whether that's a short hike or a long haul, and then the teamwork, leaders that are willing to roll up their sleeves and help dig the trenches alongside the rest of the team. That's the kind of leader I want to be. That's the kind of leader I like to work with and follow. So certainly this outlook was shaped by some of the leaders I've been privileged to follow, whether those be informal roles as bosses and business leaders, or in informal roles as people in my life, or colleagues. It's been shaped by my own lessons in leadership. I think it's largely, as many things in my life have been shaped by my very close relationship with my dad. He was a Green Beret in Vietnam, and so grew up with stories of back in the day, stories of what it was like to be in special forces at that time, and the leadership qualities it took for all of the soldiers, not just the assigned leader, including the assigned leader, but not only the assigned leader. So what it took for them to do what they were tasked with doing. I think that those lessons of leadership that the fact that there's leaders at all levels and in lots of roles has shaped my overall view of again, the kind of leader I want to be and the kind of leaders I like to follow.
I like that your definition also went beyond what we traditionally, it encompasses that, but when you elaborated on what shaped it, is that it's not just of what other people think leadership is, or maybe what the textbook definition of leadership is because it's who you want to be as a leader and what you liked about others. And oftentimes we forget, we just see maybe a leader and we just think, well, what are their qualities? And that's going to be it. But then we forget about there's that element of what kind of leader do we want to see and be, and that we're generally attracted to in the sense of, wanting to grow our skills like that. And so I think that's very powerful for those that are listening and thinking about their own leadership definition is, you can, if you're a leader, you can look at what you're doing, right? But that there might be good and bad to that if you do that self-reflection, but also look to others that you think that you would naturally just be like, that's a great leader, and see and break that down, which I think you did here as well. But when you think about leadership and in general over the years, what do you think we're getting wrong about leadership?
Oh, well, wow. How much time do we have? I think the big one that comes to mind is that the notion that leadership is positional or title driven or tenure based. That because someone has a job, that they're naturally a leader. Sadly, that's not always the case. Or also that leadership looks a certain way, as you were just describing. So I don't think any of those things are true. That by default your position or your title or your tenure make you a leader. Now, I think there's positions and titles and things that necessitate a leader, but unfortunately the right people aren't always in the right roles. So I think what we get wrong is some of these false assumptions that it's a certain personality or certain education, or that it has to be that to be a leader, you're leading big things and have big impact. I think we see leaders in everyday little mundane things as well, and so I feel like we've sort of attached a false assignment, I guess, to leadership and title, or leadership and position, or leadership and tenure as the same thing.
Yeah, I like it. I like that. I kept thinking, we've designed a specific narrative or an archetype that we think that this is what a leader should look like, should act like, should have this background, and then we associate then that with a position, which I think a lot of our leaders have also mentioned, in the sense that leadership isn't about a position, although many of you do have those types of positions, but those are decision-making positions, yeah. Right? And then there's the element of actually leadership, which ties into so much about your teams and building those trusting relationships, which you don't need a position to do that. Right? Or you don't need a position to be of influence somehow. So I love your distinction there. I do want to also talk about, because you work with very diverse stakeholders kind of across for various different projects, either in your position now or in your previous experiences, can you give us some communication strategies as you've worked with diverse stakeholders? What's worked, what hasn't, and what do you recommend for those that want to expand a project or initiative outside of their circle of influence?
Yeah, really good question. So communication strategies. So I think, first of all, I think all of us focusing on continuing to evolve our communication skills is a lifelong pursuit that benefits and impacts every single aspect of our life. So what is the saying that communication is about being understood, not just saying words that you want somebody to hear. If I say them and you don't understand them, then I have not communicated effectively. So as far as communication strategies across diverse professionals, so I first try to remind myself that human beings bring their own perspective to a conversation, that our realities and things going on in our lives and our experiences lived won't be the same. And so that helps me slow down and and try to think about how I might be coming across, how they might need to hear this thing, how they might be thinking of it. It helps me remember that I will benefit from getting their thoughts, so that I don't get too convinced of my own opinion of the world. And that's extremely important in this diverse landscape that healthcare is and needs to continue to evolve into, so that we get all of those different perspectives. So if you think about someone weighing in on a topic from their view, there's a good chance, because of their different perspective on the world, that they'll come up with something that had never dawned on me. Even though I consider myself an intelligent enough person, I don't think of the world in the same way that everybody around me necessarily thinks of it. It reminds me of medications, and the topic of medications in a healthcare space. So everybody, not everybody, but many constituents have their view of the medication life cycle, if you will. So certainly pharmacists have a perspective. And when we think about or talk about medication or treatment regimen for someone, we think about certain things around that medication and that patient. And then when you talk about that same medication to a nurse and that same patient, they also have a perspective, but it's a slightly different one because their role in the medication process is slightly different. Same with physicians, same medication, same patient, slightly different responsibilities in the process. And so they think about it in a slightly different view. And then the patients, which is one that certainly needs to stay in the middle. Same medication, same patient, a completely different view. So I think that perspective holds on any communication topic, whether it's medication or heck, politics or whatever. That remembering that how we all think about a topic is how we think about it, and not necessarily how the people around us think about it. So slowing ourselves down and giving space to the people around us to be able to share their point of view, it will help in the actual communication, that actual understanding to help move whatever forward.
Yeah, and having that mindset of, and you mentioned this, wanting to learn from the others, right? So recognizing that there's a different perspective, that it's not that you're just going to go and convince that other perspective to flip or to change, that actually there's so much value in having that, like you mentioned, and then you are willing to listen to that. You're willing to accept and say, I'm going to learn from that, is powerful.
I think that's really important. And unfortunately, sometimes there is not any wiggle room for, maybe the message has to be what the message is, for safety reasons or what have you. Oftentimes there's wiggle room, and sometimes we think there's not when there really is. But sometimes there's not, and that's okay too. But still slowing down and having everyone sort of share their perspective builds trust, builds relationships, makes people feel heard and understood, so that the next conversation you have with them, the next communication you have with them is on a stronger foundation. So there's always value in it, whether or not there's wiggle room in whatever the thing is about.
Yeah. So this is great. So I encourage everyone to, as you have questions, to please submit them in the Q&A box. We only have a couple more questions on my end, and then I'm going to open it up to audience questions. So I do want to ask about what leadership and maybe leadership lessons and advice you would like to provide both current and future leaders, both men and women, when it comes to them thinking about their career or just how they define success, or just in general of what you'd learned that you want to share.
Yeah, so there's so many lessons, and we've talked about some of them already. That over time, if we pay attention, there's things to be learned from the things that experiences we've already lived. But I guess one big lesson I think about when I think about leaders, particularly new leaders, but sometimes seasoned leaders as well. And I think I may have mentioned it already. We don't have to have it all figured out all the time. And in fact, I think pretending that we do is a disservice to the people we might be trying to lead, because it sets an expectation that isn't achievable, because nobody has it all figured out all the time. So we don't have to know all the things. We need to keep learning, and we need to gain other perspectives and take in other points of view, and work towards figuring out the things that maybe we don't know off the top of our head. I think being really authentic about, oh man, I'm not quite sure what to do here, but my job as a leader is to go figure it out, which I will commit to do. But being authentic about the fact that I might not know off the top of my head is, I think, a powerful message to the teams. So that's a big one. And then the leadership really is ultimately about the team and the people. Leading people from here to there or to accomplish this or that. It isn't about the process. The process is a means to an end, right? It's of course important, but leadership at the end of the day is about inspiring the team as a whole to do their best work. So keeping that focus, I think, is one of the big lessons and pieces of advice that I try to give folks when asked this kinds of question.
Yeah. I think there's so many different elements that have kind of tied in together too, about being self-reflecting and understanding. And then when you do that, you actually also realize there are things that you know and there's things that you don't know. And if you've self-reflected and you haven't put anything on your list of things you don't know, self-reflect again, right? And so that's also very important, right? And if you don't know how to self-reflect there, you had mentioned this, look to what you quote unquote, what didn't work, what you would have deemed before this failures, and self-reflect on those, right? Like sometimes we often think that if the list of what we don't know was longer than the list that we do know, that there's somehow a gap. No, I feel like it's definitely something to grow on, which is great.
Yeah.
Now, before we get,
Sorry, I just wanted to add, it's funny.
Please.
So whoever is interviewing with me in the future, I almost always ask that question in interviews of tell me something that didn't go well and what you learned from it. I mean, when somebody, and people have, not very many, but a few people have said, I can't think of anything, that's a huge red flag.
100%.
Think of anything in your life that hasn't gone well, that is not possibly true.
Yeah, because I think it's the notion people think that if they talk about that as if some sort of failure, like that, as if nobody fails, that's going to be a weakness or a bad thing for them, but it's actually the opposite, right? Not recognizing that you are human and that you make mistakes is the bad part. It is not that you make mistakes. So I do want to ask one more question before we open it up to audience questions, because we do take an opportunity to support one another towards the end of these sessions. And so we really want to recognize the positive influence we have on one another. Can you name a woman who has inspired you, and why did you choose this person?
So when I looked at this last night, I sat with this one for a really long time, and it was so hard to pick one. I've had so many fantastic teachers and colleagues and bosses and friends. I spent time thinking about my sister and my mom and my grandmothers and my aunts, and I think I kind of landed on that. When I think about inspirational women in particular, I think of the collective. We spoke before the session started about the tribe, right? So I think about inspirational women as a collective rather than one in particular. The power in our differences in this tribe, and all that I've learned from women and girls, and have helped define who I am and who I continue to become. So what is that quote? And I can't attribute it to who said it, but here's to strong women. May we know them. May we be them. May we raise them. That's what I think about when I think about the influential women in my life, the tribe, the collective of people from all aspects of, childhood and teachers and career and family and friends that have influenced me to strive to continue to be the best version of myself.
I like that, because sometimes you need to be inspired in multiple different facets. Life is very multifaceted, very colorful. So you need to be inspired, and oftentimes that comes from different sources.
Right.
So I like that. So we do have a question about if you could comment on your role in AI equity and diversity.
So great question. So the team that I'm on is a sort of the clinical leadership team for IBM, and our job, my boss uses the phrase is of the conscious of the company, right? So because we're clinicians and have walked in the shoes of the people who use the kinds of tools that we create, our role is to show up on the behalf of pharmacists and nurses and physicians and healthcare administrators and all of these kinds of folks who are on the receiving end, and so as it relates directly to AI and equity, our team is doing a lot of work on educating internally about equity, not and have been for a while, but certainly during this year and all of that has sort of erupted around this topic, an important topic to really get in a deep dialogue. We've really stepped up our efforts. So having conversations not only about diversity on teams and diversity in perspective, and all flavors of diversity, right? A diverse perspective of diversity, but also diversity and equity in data. So we've got these great teams of data scientists and clinician informaticians and things like that who work with our technology groups to understand the limitations of data sets that are available, because as we talked about earlier, there's some element of the data, the data that we have is the data that we have at the moment, and there needs to be work and is work continuing to address the insufficient diversity in that data. But in the meantime, this is the data we have, and there are answers and insights buried in it. So how do we highlight the realities of the data and make sure that the end user knows the limitations of the data, but can still use the data to make a decision, much like we've all been trained to do around primary literature. So perhaps I'm looking at a study and I want to use it in a patient of mine, but my patient doesn't look exactly like the study participants look, which is common, as we all know. My patient does have comorbidities. My patient might be a little older, might be a little heavier or whatever. Knowing what was the data that's in that study and the kinds of patients that it was conducted on is important. And so then I use my clinical judgment to extrapolate how I want to use that information to treat the patient that's standing in front of me. We need to do that same thing with data and the data as it lives today. So our team does focuses on that sort of thing to help support our business be able to use the data as it exists today while simultaneously working on the really global discussion around growing diversity in data.
And I like it's even looking at now the failures, quote unquote, or limitations of the data, right? And having those hard conversations around, how is it that we're collecting? What is it that we're collecting? And I think the efforts that you talked about in terms of creating those teams and understanding, even first defining the equity and diversity and what that means, and then having the hard conversations of this is the data that we have available, but we are willing and working towards changing that and adapting that, which I think is very powerful as well. And there's one other question about whether you consider yourself a visionary leader.
Oh my gosh, my gut reaction is no. And I think probably that's a bias in my mind of those folks being, the Nelson Mandelas of the world and not seeing myself in that light. I think I would not give that label to myself. No, I think that I'm a passionate leader who tries my best to put a lot of focus on the team and the people. And sometimes that, again, going back to that idea of the collective, then the collective can be visionary together, but the title itself, that role itself doesn't resonate with how I would describe myself. No. I'd like to, maybe when I get older.
Well, it's nice because I think oftentimes when we think about that, then we begin to think about who do we consider? I think like to a lot of our conversation, right? The first thing that usually comes to mind is like, wait, who would that be? And am I like them, right? And so you had mentioned that. And so I think it's just it also breaks down to how we define things and what that means to us. And I think learning more about how people define that or see that, you'll actually see, again, from the perspectives and the different experiences that we bring in, that we define things very differently. And having those conversations are actually very interesting for sure. Now we are at time. So are there any other closing remarks or final thoughts that you would like to add, Tina?
I don't think so. I think I love the fact that you're doing this series and have such a different and eclectic group of leaders. I guess I would close with going back to that idea, as we've talked quite a bit about the introspection and the value in that. And you can put different words on it if that one is sort of maybe a little bit too floofy for some folks, but that ability to hold, or that practice of holding ourselves accountable to learning from the things that we have just experienced, both the good and the bad things, I think is something to consider for folks, and certainly something that took me a while in my life to be comfortable with. So I would leave that as an idea to consider for the folks on the call.
Yeah, I really like it. It's also very consistent with a lot that people have said in terms of when you do look back, you're able to fail fast and learn and adapt and continue to be agile, which is very important as a leader. Now, on behalf of Salus Vitae Group and myself, I would like to thank you, Tina, for joining us today and for sharing your experiences and your outlooks. This has been so great. I think there are several actionable items people can think about as they do their own introspection and build their capabilities to address all the challenges that we have, but looking at it from a very positive light, consistent to what we've done in the past. And again, a special thank you to you and all of our guest leaders for a wonderful 2020 Insights from Women Leaders series. Now, all 10 of the events will be available on our website so that if you've missed any, you can go back and watch them. And if you've shared any information, please be sure to tag us at Salus Vitae Group, because we would love to see what you gained from these sessions. Thank you all again for attending, and we hope to see you next year. Have a wonderful holiday season.
Thank you.
Thank you.